So it's the beginning of the year, which for me means that I go through all of the different tools and things that I use for my music production and try to organize them a bit and see if I can maybe have a bit of a better workflow. Usually around the end of the year is the time when all of the plugins go on discount and you might buy a few different things. So when New Year's comes around, it's a good idea to actually start organizing all of those things. So this gave me a great opportunity to look through all of the plugins that I use on a daily basis. What I'm going to do for this video is I'm going to cover all of the free plugins that I use on a daily basis, because I don't want this video to be very long. So I'm in here in the project. You can see it's just a starting project of mine. I actually can delete all of this. I've just loaded up the plugins that I wanted to show on a single audio chain. I'm actually not going to show you how you want to use individual plugins with individual example sounds. I think that's a little bit of a strange way of showing off a plugin. What I think is much more important is talking about the general purpose of it, instead of relying on one or two sound sources for each plugin. So I just talk about what I find interesting in each of the plugins and why I actually use them. So these are all in a little bit of a random order. I just went through my list of plugins and I kind of went through all of the names that I recognize from the times that I've actually used them. And I've just plotted them on a track and we can have a look at them. So the very first one that I have here is called Deelay. This is a delay plugin, and the only real reason why I use this delay over any of the other delays is not because of the actual sound of the delay itself. It is very nice sounding, it's a good sounding delay, but there's this cool thing in that you can have this diffusion in there. And there's other plugins that do this as well, but the way that the diffusion works in here is very good. It sounds very nice. Also, you have control over the size, which not a lot of other plugins do. So there's a little bit of an extra parameter there. So these are the two parameters that if I want to have a little bit of a reverby sounding delay tail to a sound, this is the plugin that I go to. Now, obviously, there's other things that this plugin does. There's a bunch of different modes that are very interesting to play with. I've never really found any use for them because to me they sound way too chaotic. But you can definitely maybe get some cool sounds out of those specifically for psytrance. This mode determines the different kind of playback method that it's used. Does it go reverse forward? Does it only go in reverse? So it will take the delay samples that it takes and it will play them in reverse. We'll use chaos, which does some pitch shifting as well. And then you have reverse chaos, which is reverse playback plus pitch shifting. Finally, there's a whole bunch of different distortion algorithms that you can use. These all sound decent. It's not something that I would specifically open up this plugin for if I just want to distort something, which you can do. Obviously, if you just set this to 0 milliseconds, it will just become a distortion if you just use this single knob. Or you can use it as a reverb as well. If the delay is actually 0, then obviously the delay portion isn't being engaged. And it will have a fairly similar sound to something like a dimension expander. One thing to note with this delay is that it does something that also the kilohertz delay does, is it allows you to turn on ping pong mode, but for that ping pong mode to be effective and to actually sound like ping pong, you need to turn up the spread here. Otherwise, the delay will still be mono and you don't get an actual ping pong effect between left and right. One final thing to note is that this plugin is just very user friendly. You have a randomize button here that just allows you to quickly pop in ideas. You have an A and B section, which actually shows A and B. As you can see that it goes into dark mode and light mode. You can also use it for that if you want to use this plugin in dark mode. Finally, there's a whole bunch of different presets, not just for the delay, but for a whole bunch of different things. As you can see, reverbs as well. We have a lot of design ones here, which are very interesting to try out on different sounds. The next plugin is a little bit of a staple of mine in terms of mixing. I've featured it on the channel before. I've shown it off in a certain mixing tip video if I remember correctly. And the only reason why I use this is to add brightness. If I want to go for a very nice kind of air band on a particular sound, then I will open up this plugin, set it to 40K, and then go up here to get the amount of air that I want. This is really only where I use this plugin. I don't use any of the other bands. Maybe in 1 or 2 productions I've experimented with these bands, but I've never really used it for that, because to me the frequencies that are being set here don't really work for the way that I want to mix. As you can see, you cannot actually change these frequencies. These are fixed. This is, I believe, based off a actual analog model. So obviously we're working within the constraints of that original model here. There's some extra controls as well down below here. Here you can turn on mastering mode, which just constrains you to individual steps. You can turn on the analog, which I believe emulates a little bit of the analog flavors from the original equalizer. Finally, there's an auto gain, which is very nice. And there's also this trim here, which you can use to set the final output volume as well. So overall, a very well-rounded plugin, and everything is in one interface, and it's very quick. The final thing that I want to say about this plugin is that you may have noticed that I've set it to 40K, which doesn't really make sense if you think about it musically. Usually the frequencies that we hear just go up to around 20K. But what happens is that the curve that is being used is very shallow. So this curve bleeds down into the audible frequencies. And that's why 40K gives us a little bit of a stranger kind of boost, because we're not actually boosting the frequencies that we hear. We just hear the roll off of that EQ band processing the higher frequencies. This also means that you have a little bit more room here to wiggle within. And because you're not actually, setting 5 dB of gain to any audible frequency, but a frequency much higher than that. So the roll-off will be lower in volume, which just translates down to that you have a little bit more control over precise values. Next plugin is very easy, the Dimension Expander. Now I don't use this specific instance of the Dimension Expander in day-to-day production, stuff like that. But what I do use is the Dimension Expander inside Serum. The process, however, is exactly the same. So this is the same Dimension Expander as in Serum, obviously with a different interface, because in the synth it has to fit in the synth. But it sounds exactly the same and it works exactly the same. You have the same kind of controls over it as well. You have a size control, which basically determines how late the reflection is, and then a mix control to set the overall mix of the effect. Now the moments where I do use this plugin in particular is if I need some very subtle stereo enhancement. Sometimes I go for kind of a stereo processor or a stereo generator, but sometimes that just doesn't work for the sound, and in those cases I'll try the Dimension Expander as this actual instance of the plugin. This usually happens later on in the chain or even in mixing, stuff like that. When I'm doing sound designing, as I said before, I use the Dimension Expander that comes within Serum. The next plugin is MSED. This is also a stereo control, but I use different stereo processors for my actual stereo control, the stereo width control. What I use this for is just for the decode and encode mode. I've made a video on this as well. I believe that's the same video that references the Luftikus trick that I showed before. But what this essentially does is if you place this encode mode before a plugin and then the decode mode after a plugin, its left-right processing becomes mid-side processing, which for a lot of plugins that don't feature mid-side processing means that you are able to do mid-side processing with those plugins anyway. So this is something very specific. I wouldn't say that I use this on every project even, but this is definitely something that I've used more than once over even the last few months. The next plugin, or plugins I should say, is kind of like a bundle. These are 3 different plugins here. This is Gatelab. This works as a volume gate. Next one is Filterstap, which works as a filter modulation. And then the third one is Panflow, which works as a panning device, an auto pan device. And all of these are free. They look very professional. They look very good. They have a lot of features built in, as you can see. This is also suitable for live play if you're into that kind of stuff, because you can click here and it will randomize the kind of curve that it uses. But you can see these 3 plugins together as an alternative to something like Cable Guys' bundle or LFO Tool even, but specifically designed for kind of trans-gated effects or gated effects. So this is really powerful. The way that I like to use these is to just flick through different presets on sounds that I feel need a little bit more dynamics. Specifically the Gatelab, I think that's the most used. I don't specifically remember me using Filterstap, but it was unlocked when I opened it up. When you open up this plugin for the first time, you have to input your email address because it does need to be registered to your email. It is still free though, so it's still a good thing. So you don't have to license anything, but it still requires your email. And the email didn't show up, so for me, I know that I've used this in productions before as well. But I would say that definitely the one that I use the most is Gatelab here, because volume transgates are very common in psytrance. The next plugin that I want to show is CloudSeed. This is a reverb, and it's meant to make fairly long, very lush reverbs. For me, I really only use this as a preset browser. There's a few presets that come here, and those are the ones that I use. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure if I know the controls of this plugin. Sometimes it feels like I want a type of reverb and I'm just not able to get it with this type of reverb here. It's a little bit hard to get into and a little bit hard to understand for me. So 90% of the time when I need a long lush reverb, I'll either go for a different plugin or I'll have a reverb that fits in here. Hyperplane is a fun preset. The Noise in the Hallway is a fun one. So that's really where I use this, mainly as a preset browser, and sometimes it just really works well on the sound, so that's why I have it. The next plugin is a metering plugin. This is DP Meter 5. This allows you to tell what the loudness of your tracks are. This is very useful in mastering, and I only really use this in mastering. I do go back and forth between different loudness meters though. The other one that I like to use is M Loudness Analyzer, but they both tell you the same thing. It's not like they're going to change the sound or something like that, so it doesn't really matter. This one I don't think is free. I know for a fact that this one is free, so that's why it's in the video. That being said, this one is maybe a little bit more complete. It has 3 different modes. I don't know what the difference is between EBOO and dial mode. I think EBOO is the standard way of doing it. It does read out the LUFS and the max peak, which is really the only thing that I'm interested in when I'm using a mastering analyzer like this. And as you can see, the interface is just very nice, very clean, very minimal. So we have very few things that we need to worry about. All of the values show up nice and big. So that's very nice to use. The next 2 plugins that I like to use are both from the same manufacturer and they both accomplish the same kind of task. These are Clankhelm's saturation plugins. This one is the DC1A3. I use this one a little bit less than the other one, but this also has a nice saturation. One of the things that I needed to kind of get used to is that this mix knob is actually, you can actually change this. It took me a while to figure out that this text was editable. Other than that, you have input and output, and obviously you use this at the top here to kind of gauge where the level needs to be. Other than that, I've not really played with any of these knobs down here. I do like the kind of saturation that it adds, but I usually go for the other plugin made by Clankhelm for this job. And that's IVGI2. And this plugin is a little bit easier to understand for me because it just has a drive, and this allows me to just turn up the drive to get more saturation. And obviously, again, you can use this nice little display here to actually see what your levels are hitting at. There's a few different responses, and you also have this asymmetrical mix. I usually leave all of these at the default and just turn up the drive to see if it works on my sound or not. So to be quite honest, I don't really know this plugin very well. I don't know what all of the knobs do. For me, it just works or doesn't. I don't like to spend a lot of time tweaking parameters on individual plugins. I much rather like to have a bunch of plugins that just go straight to the point. And for saturation, nothing is as fast as opening up a plugin like this and just setting the drive where it needs to be. If that doesn't work, then I go on to the next plugin and try with that. The next 2 plugins that I want to talk about are both clippers. Now I use 2 different clippers. One is for the mastering purposes and one is for my mixing purposes. I like this one for mixing a lot more because it has a graph and it has a nicer readout of what it's actually doing with like gain reduction and stuff like that. So that's where I use it for a clipper. The way that you use it is you just want to input gain and then you want to out gain as well. And these 2 should roughly match. And the goal of a clipper is obviously to bring up the volume and bring down the dynamic range in a way that is very strong. It's stronger than a limiter because it responds instantly instead of like a limiter which has release time. Now this is actually a free version of a full plugin that is now discontinued, which means that there's a bunch of options that I cannot actually use. The oversampling, for example, doesn't work. And that means that for oversampled clipping, what you would need to use is some kind of different plugin, which is where this FreeClip comes in. This has a bunch of different clipping modes. For mastering purposes, I like to use the hard clipper because that's the cleanest below the clipping point, below the threshold. Then once I've added my gain to it and I set the oversampling to something around 4 or 8, I can get a little bit of a louder master without having to push my limiter more. Usually the way that I like to do it is I have a mastering compressor, then a mastering clipper, and then finally a mastering limiter. And all 3 of them are doing a little bit of gain reduction to try to reduce the peaks. The goal of the clipper is really to cut off the very loudest peaks that are very sudden. Those are the kind of peaks that limiters really have issues with. The kind of loudness that you want to get from a limiter is the more kind of sustained loudness. Whereas a clipper is very nice to catch those very small peaks that happen once in a while that are really unpredictable, maybe the result of random synths or something like that. In those cases, you definitely want to use a clipper over a limiter. So those were all of the different plugins that I wanted to check out in this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was just kind of a rundown of all of the free plugins that I use. I think it's fairly interesting. If you want to see more of this kind of content, then you can let me know by leaving a like. And if you're new here, you can subscribe. Also, if you want to receive messages whenever I upload, turn on the bell notifications. Finally, if you want to support the channel financially, you can do so by either through donation or by Patreon membership. But that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video and hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.